Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new episode on the podcast. Today is going to be a really good episode, actually. It's the focus of the episode is autism, and I'm joined with author JD, based in America. So it's always really interesting when I get a guest on from a different part of the world from where I am, because you just know how impactful that is to the audience, and you get more viewers as well when you get people from around the world. So JD, if you wouldn't mind just doing a little introduction of yourself.
Sure. Pleasure to meet you. I'm JD Barker. I'm a New York Times bestselling author based out of New England in the States. I live on an island off the coast of Portsmouth. I'm pretty sure we stole every single town name that we have in my area from you guys. They were not creative when they came over here. But like Paul Revere rode right by my house back in the day. Like it's a pretty cool spot to live. Um, but I'm a full-time author. I've been doing that now. It'll be 10 years in November, so I'm coming up on my anniversary for that. But I'm also autistic, and I was diagnosed at 22, so a little late in life. So that's kind of what I like to talk about and why I'm here to basically explain to people the journey that I've had, how it impacted my life early on prior to getting diagnosed, and how it helped me once I did get a diagnosis to basically use it in a lot of ways. Grab the parts that were beneficial and build on those.
Definitely. And yeah, it's could be really good to hear about your journey and your journey into talking about it, like as you being an author as well. And it's funny you say that about New England and Portsmouth because they are places in England. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So it's quite funny how in the US that happens. Um, so it's kind of 10 years since you've been an author. So I guess to start off, why did you want to become an author?
Honestly, it's something I've done all my life. I grew up without a television in the house, so I was reading at a very young age, and autism may have played a part in that. I don't know, but I was reading by the time I was three. By the time I entered kindergarten, I had read all the Hardy Boy and Nancy Drew mysteries. So anybody old enough to remember those will remember what that's like. And then I started in on the classics like Charles Dickens and books like that. But I had always written, and I think just because I read so much, it was just something that I really enjoyed. I mean, the fact that you can create a world, you can create people, and you can put a reader in that world and introduce them to all these things, that completely fascinated me. I mean, you never knew what you could expect when you opened up the cover of a book, and I wanted to be part of that. But at the same time, my parents didn't necessarily encourage it. They told me many times you can't make a living as an author. So they pushed me into the corporate world. They pushed me to go to college, get a degree, and go that route. But I always wrote, on the side. I did it to, because that was my hobby. It was something I felt like I had to do.
Yeah. It's a really good way to because I think autism really links in with hobbies. I find myself, we may get really interested in them and talked about them a lot. Um, like for me personally, is I quite like Doctor Who, so Doctor Who and football are the main two for me. And reading or writing is for you. Um, so, how do you impact your story, your personal journey? Like, do you write about your personal journey of your with autism in your writing?
I haven't had any characters that I've flat out said were autistic, but I've had characters with tendencies. So I think people that recognize them will see it, which is kind of like how I was brought up. I mean, because in the 70s, if you were autistic, at least here in the States, there wasn't any real treatment for that. You were just kind of the weird kid that they put off in the corner. I didn't get diagnosed, like I said, until 22. So I had 2 decades of dealing with all that. So that changed quite a bit for me. And I've had characters where I've kind of put them along a similar journey. I think it's kind of fun to call out those traits that I learned later were autistic and just kind of play them, so somebody can, if they're reading it and they recognize them, they understand what it is.
Definitely. And I think the really good thing about being autistic, everyone is different. They're not all, we might have similar things of our ways, but we're gonna have it all. Everyone's gonna not be the same, and I think that is kind of a stigma with autism actually. That if people don't understand it, they will just think everyone is the same with autism. And it's as well as people seem to think it's about looks. Like if in a sense, which is quite bad really, because people would say if you don't look like you can do anything, that makes you autistic, and it's quite judgmental. And I think early on, especially into my journey, maybe into yours as well. It is actually really hard. It's hard enough to get diagnosed, but it's also hard to. It's that beginning stage, isn't it, of being diagnosed and kind of admitting to yourself that you have autism.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like I went through those the first 23 years or so of my life without knowing what it was. I knew there was something there. I knew I was different. If I went to a party, I didn't necessarily want to be there. If somebody told a joke, I laughed because the people around me were laughing, not because the joke was funny to me. I tended to mimic the people around me and try to, kind of get through life that way. But I didn't know why I was doing that. I was in the corporate world. My last real job, I was a chief compliance officer at a brokerage firm, which is as horrible as it sounds. But I was in charge of quite a bit. Basically all the rules and regulations in the financial industry, I had to make sure that the employees followed, all the clients followed, and I was the gatekeeper of all that. But I had what my boss felt were anger issues, because I would interpret rules and regulations. I would tell people what they needed to do, and if somebody didn't follow those, it aggravated me, and I had trouble, presenting that. So at one point, he sent me to an anger management therapist, and we were about 20 minutes into the conversation, and she stopped and she said, "Have you ever been diagnosed for autism?" And prior to that, my only experience with it had been that movie Rain Man with Tom Cruise. I knew nothing at all about it. But she started bringing up some of the things that I was doing, like I was, my fingers, like I was rubbing my thumb and my index finger together through the entire conversation.
Yeah,
When I spoke to her, I never made eye contact, which is something I've noticed over the years. Like if I was talking to somebody, if I look off to the side, I can remember almost every word of the conversation, almost perfect recall.
yeah,
But if I look at somebody, directly, I'm not able to do it. I can barely follow the conversation. But she pointed that out. So then she told me that she treats autistic children, and that's why she had, noticed these things in me. And then she sent me for a number of tests, and shortly after that, I got the diagnosis. And honestly, once I got that diagnosis, I was able to read a lot of books on it. I was able to watch movies about it, and documentaries, and really understand what was going on. And I don't want to say that like a healing process happened because I don't necessarily feel like anything was really wrong, but it allowed me to understand a lot of it, and pick apart, these are the bad parts of it, and this is what I need to focus on fixing, and here are the good parts. And I think if I double down on those, I can be more effective as a human being and more successful. And that's kind of what I did.
yeah. It's I completely I understand what you're saying because like for me as well, I especially when I was younger, I say people were laughing, I would just laugh with them like you did, and even sometimes if I would say something, someone would laugh, I would think people were laughing at me, not with me. But now I look back, they were laughing at me in a funny way, not a bad way. But sometimes you don't notice that. Um, and
Right.
and with the eye contact as well, even now, um, which we may not even be looking. We don't have to look at each other, which is the good thing about doing this online, is because we're on a call. Like you're not going to know I'm looking at you. You may look. It may look like to you that I am, but maybe I'm not. Maybe I'm just looking over there. So it's really annoying that, especially like let's say job interviews, they require people to look. If you don't look, sometimes you won't get the job, and that
Right.
I find is quite bad, really, isn't it? Because you shouldn't have to look at someone, even though you're engaging with them, to get a certain job.
Well, I mean, in a lot of ways, we're mimicking other people, right? We're playing a part. Like I've spent, now 30 years, I'm 53 now, so 30 years basically working on this, and I've learned to make eye contact in a conversation and force myself to do it. I've forced, learned how to respond in the ways that, a normal person would. But in a lot of ways, that's all acting. The only person who really sees me for who I am is my wife. We just had our 10-year wedding anniversary, but like, this is a performance that I put on, and I'm able to do it most of the time, but you can't do it all the time. So when you're around somebody 24/7, they get to see the real you. So she has seen me without that mask, without the pretend. And honestly, like when I do, like if I have to get in front of a crowd and I have to put that persona on, it's draining. I feel like I'm dialed up to 11 for the amount of time I'm doing it. And then afterwards, I crash. I need to relax. Sometimes I need alone time or whatever it might be. But I've learned to adapt to that and work it into my schedule. My wife understands it. If we talk, she knows that if I'm not making eye contact, that I'm actually paying attention. Like she knows that if I make eye contact, I might not be paying attention, like just because over the years she's picked up on all that.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like as you said, in time you'll maybe you'll get confidence for the eye contact. But I think it's maybe if you know the person more. If you don't know someone, like you just starting to meet someone, or they're new to you, you're not really going to look at them directly. And like if you know them well, to say fair long time, you're gonna maybe gain that confidence to look at them in the eye and maybe not just stare at them, but like every so often.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a strange thing because like I know for me anyway, I'm forcing myself to do it, So then in the back of my head, I'm thinking like, well, how long do I look at him? How long do I need to look at him before it gets weird? Should I look at something else, get back to him? And like all these things are happening in the background, and that's what keeps me from being able to actually follow the conversation, which is why if I look off to the side, I can pay a lot more attention.
definitely, definitely. And I think within television, actually, with autism, for a long time, until actually quite recently, there's been very bad representation of autism, let's say on television. Like you mentioned, Rain Man. I haven't actually watched that personally, but that is one of the ones that is quite bad of representation for autism. And there are others. And the only I watched one recently, which actually, funny enough, one of my friends was in. And I actually can't remember the name, but it was actually really good. What the story was a person's autistic and is a musician, and then you had a famous musician that was struggling who's not autistic, and needed a partner because their former partner abandoned them, and this
Mhm.
person that kind of ended up really poor. And then the autistic, they were auditions for the partner, and then the autistic one couldn't found it really hard to communicate and couldn't was playing on the drums was um really really good on the drums, but say he wasn't really paying attention to the audience. And it's really good representation of autism, which is really hard to find nowadays because most of it is
Yeah.
like rubbish.
One of my favorite ones, and you're probably going to laugh, it's a movie with Ben Affleck called The Accountant, where he plays an assassin, but he's an autistic assassin. And like they actually hit like the various traits like spot on through the entire movie. It was very impressive to me because they didn't overplay it, they didn't downplay it. It was just very, to me, very realistic. So that again, like you said, that's one of the few times I've actually seen them get that right.
Yeah.
Stephen King, to his credit, in a couple of his novels, he's got a character named Holly Gibney, who's autistic, and he's hit that out of the park every single time. I've read every one of the books, and I haven't seen an instance yet where he was actually wrong, which makes me think he's got somebody in his life that probably is autistic that
Yeah.
he's playing on. But all that kind of stuff helps to bring it into the focus a little bit and make more people aware of what's happening out there.
I definitely agree. There was a recent series that I actually applied for. Um, and looking back after I applied is actually quite bad in a way, because what you would apply to be on a series to talk about your journey, but they would only pick a certain amount of people. I think only three or four got picked. But really, the fact what I'm saying is it's actually quite bad picking individuals who want to share their story because there's loads of people with autism, and they're going to be left out. So I feel like it's really hard unless you do a film, um, where I find if you're actually autistic yourself, you should play the part if you're capable of doing it, because it's hard watching maybe someone act as an autistic individual if they're not actually autism themselves, which could come across disrespectful. Unless they really know the part, they have to really play the part really well and not make it bad.
Honestly, I think a lot of the world's best actors probably are autistic and may or may not know it. But
Yeah,
just because like I go through life literally mimicking other people, I write about it all the time. I write fiction. So like I don't just write about a doctor. I become that doctor in my head in order to get it right on paper. So I could easily see an actor, almost being like a blank slate and being able to pick up on that character and, they flip that switch and become that character. So they're not necessarily pretending anymore.
Have you ever seen a series called Prison Break?
I love Prison Break.
Yeah, like Wentworth Miller as Michael Schofield. Um, and I think recently a few years ago, a few years ago now, he announced that he has autism, and you could actually see that in the series because but you can actually see he is autistic because all the stuff he does, he writes everything down, and he plans to break, even though that's just a fictional character. But in his personal, because as an actor, you're going to be yourself as well, not just the actor. You're going to mimic parts of that maybe to your everyday life. So you can actually see that Michael Schofield can be autistic, and so could Wentworth Miller.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, you can kind of see it in his face, right? Like
Yeah.
if you are autistic, I can spot him from across the room, like other people that are similar to me. And it's no different than actors on TV. Certain people it jumps out at you and their mannerisms. You take somebody like Elon Musk, it's so obvious,
Mm,
that he's autistic. And there's plenty of people that are out there that are like that.
yeah. It's good though that let's say certain people if are sharing their stories because it's not easy to talk about it about being autistic because you're maybe afraid that you're not going to get some nice comments back, especially if you're quite
Yeah.
high profile as well. Um, but I feel like that's the hardest stage. Once you get through that, it's a bit easier.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly kept quiet about it for a very long time, after I started selling books. And I know that it's the reason that I'm able to write the books that I do. I mean, you can see my desk behind me, like it's literally empty. But I'm working on 8 different novels right now, and it's all up here in my head. I'm able to plot them out. I'm able to keep that story straight, from start to finish. And I used to write computer code, and to me, writing a novel is very similar to computer code. You write that first line of code, and you have to understand how it's going to impact the last line of code and everything else in between. For me, writing a book is no different. So I've capitalized on that. But I didn't talk about it for the longest time because I didn't want that stigma attached to me. But then as I got more and more successful, I realized that, first of all, I'm success because of it. I started running into parents who had autistic children. And like their child might be 1 or 2 years old, and like they don't understand what they have ahead of them, and a lot of times it can be scary, it can be frustrating. I knew one couple, their son would beat his head against the wall, and he was not even 2 years old. He would just scream and just beat his head against the wall, and like they didn't know what to do or who to talk to. And I ended up talking to them because I wanted them to understand that when I was younger, that is something that I did. And here I am now. I'm a successful author, making a very nice living. So there is a light at the end of that tunnel. You just have to get through it. And learning that your child is autistic, I think the earlier that happens, the better, because you're able to adjust for it and accommodate that child and capitalize on it.
I agree. You tend to get more support as soon as you try because it is hard to even know that if you're autistic or not because there's so many different ways that you can be autistic. Um, but like you say, I feel like the earlier you get diagnosed, the
Yeah, I mean,
better.
in our case, with our daughter is 7 now. But I was watching for it, literally from the moment she was born because it is hereditary. But it's a 5-to-1 ratio. Five boys typically get it before one girl, so it's pretty uncommon for a girl to get it. But I started noticing things in my daughter, as early as 12 months, and by 18 months, I was fairly confident she was. Not to the extent that I am, but I knew that she had something there. And then about a year ago, we went and had her tested and evaluated. And that whole process has changed. It wasn't something that was even available to my parents back in the 70s if they wanted to do it. In today's world, where we are, we're in New Hampshire. There are state programs to do that, but unfortunately, there was a waiting list that was about 8 months long. So we ended up paying out of pocket to have the testing done over the summer, because we wanted to have that diagnosis so we could have a plan in place for when she started her next school year, which is essentially what we did. But catching it at such an early age, like she's not as, I don't want to say as bad as I am, but she doesn't have as many symptoms or issues as I did as a child. But we're able to focus on the couple that she does have and hopefully adjust them and just make her life just a little bit easier as she gets older.
Yeah, it's really good that how you've identified that really early on. Especially maybe
Yeah.
from your experience as well, kind of linking that in with your daughter, um, because it is really difficult. I was diagnosed when I was 9. Um, so I was at school when I was diagnosed, and I I was very a shy person. You may not believe it. I was very shy when I was at school, and when I had autism, I thought it was the worst thing in the world. Because at that time period, let's say the early 2000s, everyone thought it was rubbish. It was, I was taught it was worst thing to have in the world. Um, but then you learn, you get older, and you you learn it's not. It's actually a good thing to have because it can help you. It can your journey is going to be different from for everyone's, but that's okay. And then we wouldn't do a podcast we if we didn't, I guess, get diagnosed, or we wouldn't talk about it. You wouldn't talk about it in your books. So that's the good things about it. It kind of links in with what we actually do in our everyday life.
Well, I tend to approach all of it as something that needs to be fixed. You know, like if somebody puts a problem in front of me, I'm always looking for this solution to that problem. So if you go back a few years ago, let's say at the start of my writing career, 7, 8 years ago, the last thing I wanted to do was get up in front of a crowd and talk. Um, so what I ended up doing is I created a podcast called Writers Inc. That we do once a week, and we interview famous authors, and that forces me to have to talk, which made getting up on the stage in front of people, that much easier. And now it's a non-event. I was just in Budapest. I had almost 1,000 people at one of my book signings, and like it's not an issue for me anymore, because I've worked through it.
Yeah. Like when you first did book signings, like were you quite nervous about it, or was you just really excited to sign a load of books that everyone was going to get?
I was horribly nervous about it. One of my very first talks that I did, there were only two people there. It was a daughter and her mother. The girl had gotten assigned my bookstore talk by her English teacher, so she basically was required to be there, and her mother had to drive her. So that was my entire audience. But I've learned over the years to just, whether you've got two people or 1,000, you kind of put on the same show. And to me, it is a show. Like my author persona is a character that I've kind of created of myself. That communicates what I feel that audience wants to hear, and I try to communicate it in a way that they want to hear it. And I've perfected that over time. I've watched tons of videos of other authors. YouTube is fantastic for that kind of thing, but just to try and get a handle on, their cadence, their speaking patterns, how they walk around the stage, how they hold the microphone, when they tell a joke, when they don't, that sort of thing. And like I've learned by watching others and kind of perfected my little dog and pony show.
Yeah, like because I've spoken in front of people as well, and when I still do it now. Um, when I speak in a talk, I won't look at anyone. I'll just look in the distance. I won't look at a certain person in particular because they're always looking at me. So, but
Yeah.
and then after that, I'll be okay. I might rattle on, but I'll be okay after because I've done it. And the first time I done it was really nerve-wracking, but I think like you said, the more you do something, the more you're gonna be confident about doing it and not as nervous as you was when you first did it.
Yeah, and in all honesty, a large like the larger the crowd is, the easier it is to do because you don't see one person anymore. You see this, sea of people, and it's not quite as intimidating for some reason.
Yeah, it's quite weird that, isn't it? You'd think it'd be the opposite.
Yeah, yeah, it's always been that way though. The one-on-one conversations are always the toughest.
Yeah, yeah. I always find one-on-one conversations hard if the other person doesn't talk much. Even if it's understandable, um, but I guess you can analyze how long the conversation's going to be. if the not many people, if the other person's not going to talk much because you'll just maybe do 10, 15 minutes. Um, like us on the other case, well, it's an outgoing conversation. We're both talking, which is quite easy for us to do. Yeah.
I've always had trouble with conversations, and I think in general, any type of silence, just completely bothers me. And like, normal people can sit there, they can have silence in a conversation, but I think as an autistic person, we see that as something that needs to be filled. Again, it's another problem that has to be solved. We feel like somebody needs to be talking at any given time. And I often try to do that. I've run out of stuff to say. Um, it's weird. Like I don't know that that ever gets any better. I just try to, make myself feel more natural about it as the years go by. But like it's always been there.
Yeah. Do you tend
You
to
know, you
get,
you, you get in, you get envious of people that just are able to sit down and just have a conversation, a normal conversation.
yeah, like if I guess if you want to not talk, you'll just not go near anyone and just go in a room on your own where you can just chill.
Yeah, I just what I do, that's not really an option, because the nice thing is like if I walk into a room, a lot of people will come up to me, so they'll initiate a conversation, and kind of force me to talk, so that's useful. But like my general state, like if I could pick, like I would much rather be in a room all by myself with just my own thoughts, and not have to deal with any of that. And that, that feeling has never gone away. And like, even if I do want to, if I do an event like the one that I just did, thousands of people that I have to talk to, shake hands with, sign books for, it's hours and hours of that activity. When it's over, I have to go someplace quiet and just recharge. And
Mm.
sometimes that can be difficult in my profession. Like, if I go to a foreign city, like in this case I went to Istanbul and went to Budapest. I was there for a little over a day and a half. My publishers structure a lot of stuff to happen during that time frame. So there's not only book signings, but there's interviews, there's television, there's radio. So from the moment I hit the ground, they basically keep me busy and keep me busy and keep me busy. So I don't necessarily get that downtime to recharge. So I try to build it into my schedule as much as possible. Just even an hour, here or there can make a huge difference.
Definitely. You always want to keep busy.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I can understand that because like when you're doing nothing, you kind of get bored, don't you? And you don't know what to do with yourself. You don't know what to do with your thoughts. So it's always nice. Even speaking to a new person for an hour, about what you do is really, I guess, rewarding because you get to tell them about what you've done in your life around being an author, around your personal story. I know you said that there's not many people out there who you've spoken about that, so it is rare to find. But when you do find them, it's nice.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I can't sit still for sure. Um, my day is very regimented. I've got a schedule I've got to follow. Writing in general, if I don't write, it's almost like there's a voice in the back of my head that's kind of yelling. And like the longer I go without writing, the louder that voice. And the way to shut it up is to sit down and write for a little while. And I need to do it every day. Exercise to me is the same thing. I have to exercise every single day. Otherwise, I feel like I'm not doing something I'm supposed to. But because my schedule is so structured the way that it is, I end up accomplishing a lot. I'm able to knock out a lot of things for one person.
Yeah.
And I credit autism for that too. It forces me to do it.
Yeah. So, it's quite interesting that you said you have all information in your head of 8 novels that you're writing. Um, that's really interesting and really kind of impressive that you can think ahead of these 8 separate novels in your head. Like, so like, how do you come up with these ideas of all these different stories? Is this something that happens in your day, or is it something that you kind of just think about when you go to sleep at night? Like, how does that all kind of work in your head?
Well, I've got a document. I use a program called Simple Note, which is just a note-taking app I have on my phone. And I've got a folder literally called Ideas, where I drop stuff in there. So I'll give you an idea of like how my last book came together. I wanted to write about a couple, a husband and wife that had been married for about 10 years, and they still loved each other, but the marriage was kind of going south. They were kind of growing apart because they both worked, and didn't see each other that often, which is, very common, something that happens to a lot of couples. But I had the ideas for these characters in that folder for probably 2 or 3 years. And then one night, my wife and I were sitting around having dinner, and she does real estate. She had bought a house in Georgia, that she wanted to renovate and turn into a short-term rental, so Airbnb and VRBO. I don't know if you guys have those where
Yeah.
you are, but it had a lot of bathrooms. It had 7 bathrooms in it. So that's kind of what our conversation was about. And I brought up this company we have here in the States called Bath Fitters. They come in and in one day they can kind of do a cosmetic redo of a bathroom, and basically make it look like new. So we just had this conversation over dinner. Neither of us touched either of our devices. We didn't type it into anything. We didn't search for it. But that night we both started seeing ads for this company for bath fitters pop up in our social media feeds and on television, and the commercials just started coming up everywhere. So I started researching that a little bit and realized that in the terms of service for our phone, we basically give the manufacturers permission to listen to us all the time. So right now, my phone is sitting next to us as you and I are talking. It's listening to this entire conversation, and it's grabbing certain keywords that it can then put in a database and use to target me with advertising. That scared me because I started thinking about what happens if that information gets into the wrong hands. So that became another idea. So I took that idea and paired it up with my husband and wife idea that I had before and put them both together. And that basically became the genesis of my last novel.
Interesting. It's really clever as well, though. So you come up with an idea with a wife and couple been together 10 years and having problems, and then you integrate that in stuff that's happening in everyday life and society as well. So that's really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fun. I mean, a lot of times it always seems to be 2 or 3 different pieces come together, before it turns into, what could become a novel.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It might, how long? I suppose each book takes you different amount of time. Um, like how long does it take for you to kind of write up? Maybe that book you just talked about then. How long do you think that took for you to write it all up?
I've gotten it down now. It's about 3 to 4 months from start to finish, from the time I sit down and actually start and then hammer out that last page. So not too bad. It used to take a lot longer. It's like anything else. You just practice and you get better at it.
Yeah. So when you write, do you just write with that? Like, do you have anything in the background, like music or anything, or do you just write it as you think it?
Yeah, so for me, I listen to a thunderstorm soundtrack on noise canceling headphones. So I'm literally listening to rain and thunder.
Yeah.
And it's just white noise. If I listen to music, I've noticed that the writing itself takes on the tone of the music. So if it's fast music, the writing gets fast. If it's slow, it gets slow. If I listen to something with lyrics in it, forget about it, because then the words from the lyrics, will start working into it. But the white noise, are you familiar with Pavlov's dog? That whole theory?
Yeah.
Um, so back when I was in the corporate world, I would put on these headphones, and like every time I hear that sound, my brain kind of snaps into writer mode. Like I know that it's time to write. So I've always done that, and it always seems to work for me. So it's not something I'm going to change.
Yeah. I completely understand because when I write, because I write every podcast I do, I write it up afterwards what we spoke about. Um,
Mhm.
and first of all, when I started, I tried just writing it, without hearing anything in the background, no music. I just couldn't concentrate enough. It may sound weird, but writing alone without hearing anything else, I just can't concentrate. So I had to. Well, I play music like theme tunes from shows. I really like certain theme tunes from television shows. So I listen to that in the background. When I listen to that, I'm in the moment, like I'm on this big adventure. So while I'm writing the podcast episode, I'm listening to that, and when I listen to that, I end up writing much faster than I would when I wouldn't be listening to something.
Yeah, I think it helps you tune out everything else that's going on around you, and forces you to focus.
Yeah. Um. Because I remember at school a long time ago though. I was I get distracted very easily. So say someone talked to me. I would reply straight away, and then the
Mhm.
teacher's like, "You can't. Why are you talking? You're supposed to concentrate." And I said, but they asked me a question. Like, they ask you a question. You just feel rude not to answer, unless they're a disruptive person. But yeah, I find it really annoying with teachers would do that, or teachers like reading, for example. At school, they would pick on certain students to read a certain paragraph, and for me, I find that really hard. Not that I can't read, I can read, but they would pick on people that maybe were struggling, and I would find it hard because I'd find it much easier if the teacher read. But another thing that's quite annoying, I find, is when someone reads really slow. Like my mind is wanting to do really fast. When someone reads a book to me really slowly, I can't concentrate, and then I'm thinking to me
Yeah.
myself, I'm thinking about what I'm doing later in the day rather than what I'm reading, what the book's about. So when someone, like audiobooks, they just go really. You can set a speed on it, and you want to go really fast. And that's how I feel. I can't really concentrate reading something that's like this. Susie went up the road and turned left. I can't concentrate with that. It's just too slow and then lose concentration.
Yeah, I do the same thing. I speed up my audiobooks whenever I listen to them. And I think what you're talking about, like in the classroom, like if you're reading out loud and a pencil drops or, somebody walks past the door, or like all these little distractions, they pull you away from whatever, from the actual task at hand. And then you have to kind of get back into that frame of mind. And that can be very tricky. One of the things they're actually doing with my daughter, which I thought was really clever, she's in second grade. So when they read, they have the kids all chew gum. And apparently chewing gum forces them to focus, which I had never heard of before, but there's a lot of studies now behind that. Like it keeps them from, they don't pick up on all those little distractions that are happening around them anymore because now they've got the book and they're chewing gum. And like those two things combined keeps their attention focused on where it needs to be.
That's really interesting. Because yeah, it's a really good way to concentrate. Like I used to have these I ruined them, but when I would have a conversation with someone or trying to concentrate, I'd have these like soft play stimming autism like toys that I'd play with, and
Mhm.
they were like rubbery, and then I could just play with them. Well, it helped you concentrate because when you get nervous, you kind of dig into your skin sometimes, and I would
Yeah.
rather do that on an object rather than that. But with the book scenario, what I would do, which there would be questions after they've read a segment of the book or the book. So there would be a question like it would say on page 13, Sally crossed the road. Why did Timothy do that, or something like that? And the thing is, I wouldn't concentrate when reading the book, but I would know say I'd look for the name Sally on page 13, and then I'd find the answer that way. Which they made it too easy. They shouldn't have done that. They should have made like you have to read the book to do it, but you don't. You just have to brief read it, and you find it. But um, yeah, I find it hard to read books and concentrate. Um, even if I prefer things with pictures in it and with pictures like comic books. I was in a comic book once, but yeah, like a book, I've got a book right here, and I've never read it. um, and I just find it hard unless I read it audible. It's much
Okay.
easier for me, um, but I find that that's a really good skill though for your daughter and people in our class to chew gum because it probably does make you concentrate more.
Yeah, and we've tried it with her at home, and like she sits there and she does her homework. She without it, she's looking for every possible excuse not to do her homework. So like I don't know all the science behind it, but it definitely works. It does somehow it gets the job done.
Yeah, it's really good. Like at the school as well that they helped with that because sometimes in schools that they'll say that would distract someone when it doesn't. It does the exact opposite.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, because I remember once at my school when I was at school they did a teacher whether your parents would come in. I don't know if they've ever done it at your daughter's school before, but parents would come in for a day, have a lesson. And it was actually really funny because my mum actually had chewing gum because she doesn't have autism, but I believe she kind of is on the spectrum. Sometimes I see it sometimes, how shell she is. Um, but yeah, so she was chewing gum, and then the teacher, science teacher, was like, "Can you have to give that to me?" Like she was a student, but she's not. She's just there as a parent. And then I think she had to move me away from her. But it was really funny. Because I went to first of all I went to a mainstream school, and then I went
Mhm.
to a school that specialised with people who have autism and different needs, not just autism, ADHD, and anything on the spectrum, which was better. But this science teacher in particular was more of a mainstream teacher. So you know, a teacher that would just give you loads of information at once, and you'd have to really concentrate to understand. She was one of those kind of teachers, and I liked her. I
Yeah.
loved her lessons because they were really funny. And you may think the opposite when you hear me say that, but I just find the funny. Um, and once I'll tell you a small story. Once I was really good at school, but once I got told off for not bringing a pencil case to a lesson in science, and what happened was um, we didn't even use the pencil case at all. There was computers in the lesson, so I looked before the lesson, and there was computers there. So I thought we was just going to go on the computers in the lesson, which we did. So as we went in, the teacher was saying, "You should have brought your pencil case," and I said, "I understood because maybe I should have. Maybe we were going to use them, but the point was another student got given a pencil case when they did that exactly same thing as I did. So I had a conversation with them. Um, and I think she said I was getting angry. I wasn't getting angry, I was just raising my voice because I wanted to get my point heard. Where I was proud of myself because I said to my form tutor I wasn't going to do that because I thought it was
Mhm.
wrong for me to get detention for something that really silly. But for me saying what I said, she couldn't do anything because she couldn't give me the detention in the end because she would have to give the other person the detention for doing exactly the same thing I did. So I thought I laugh at that now, but at the moment of time, I was really angry about that.
I get it. I think we all go through something like that.
Yeah, definitely. But last few things, JD. Um, I'd say, is there any advice in your experience that you would give to any other people that have autism?
I mean, if anything, just get out there and do some research and try to understand it and don't be afraid to talk to somebody. I'm seeing the benefits with my daughter firsthand. Like we got her diagnosed at a very early age. From our standpoint, that allowed us to trigger some social programs that, offered her assistance. It changed her curriculum at school, which again is offering assistance and helping to better her. These are all things that weren't available to me. And, I got a crash course in it. I spent the last 30 years of my life trying to make up for the first 20 years. So I think the earlier you can get a diagnosis, the earlier you can get on top of it, the better. And that's primarily it. Just educate yourself, educate the people around you. The information is out there. You just have to know where to look.
Definitely, I completely agree. And last of all, is there one thing in your career as an author that you've been most proud of? Which is a very hard question, but is there just one thing that stands out? Maybe one book or one thing you've done that you've been really proud of doing that?
Oh, wow. So I keep setting the bar higher. So here in the States, getting on the New York Times list is a big deal. I don't know if it matters that much where you are. You've got the Sunday Times. I've been on the Sunday Times. But over here, like the first time I hit that, that was fantastic. Now I've been on there a bunch of times. But like the highest I've been is number two.
Mm.
So, like I keep shooting for number one, I guess is my next goal. Like and it's funny because as an autistic person, like I hit number two with James Patterson. I imagine you're familiar with James
Yeah.
Patterson.
Yeah.
He called me up. He called me up the first time and he said, "Hey, we're going to be number two on the list tomorrow." And like he waited for me to get excited. And I really didn't because in my head, like it clicked. Okay, I accomplished that goal. I'm a New York Times bestseller now, but I'm not a number one New York Times bestseller. And like that immediately became the goal, and that's what I've been shooting for ever since. So I guess the next thing my next accomplishment will be to become a New York Times #1 bestseller. And I don't know what comes after that, but once I hit that bar, I'm sure I'll search for another one, something a little bit higher.
Well, I hope you get there. Um,
Thank you.
I hope you get there because I think it deserves of all the work you've been doing for 10 years, and it's really good. It's been really good to speak to you because it's good to hear about your journey, how you implement autism in your books, which is I think it's really good because not many people do that, and it's really good that you do that, and I'm glad you've come on the podcast, and I hope you've enjoyed it, JD.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. It's been fun talking to you.
Thank you. And to anyone else listening and watching, we hope you've enjoyed today's episode, this week's episode, and I will see you in the next episode of the podcast. But thanks again, JD, and I hope you have a nice rest of your day.
All right, you too. Take care.
Yeah, take care.